On behalf of Observer Research Foundation, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to welcome you to this very special evening. We are here today, this evening, to launch a book that has already made a lot of waves in various ways, and to celebrate an author and his scholarship, about which a lot has already been said in newspapers, in the media, etc. We will also try to have an interesting conversation on the book, the themes that the book raises, and in some ways, the broader issues that this book has raised about not only India-Pakistan relations, but about the subcontinent, about Indian foreign policy, and about the future of this very important bilateral relationship. And in particular, I think, as Ambassador Bisaria has pointed out in this book, the role of diplomats in policy making and what they can and cannot do in a country's foreign policy. So all that for this evening. Before I formally begin the conversation and the launch, let me first invite our chairman, Sanjay Joshi, to formally introduce the author, the book, and to welcome you all more formally. After that, we'll go for launch, a formal launch, and then for a conversation. Sanjay.
Thanks, Harsh. How does one introduce someone like Ajay, a friend, a colleague, now with us in ORF, and who's so well known, whose book has already been making waves. It's been written about and commented on in the press. People have been quoting snippets of it. And it is, I can assure you, for those who haven't read it, a book which if you once start, it's very difficult to put down. You know, it's been written in such an easy style with the reader in mind. So it's a lovely book to read and to go through. So first of all, congratulations, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, for this wonderful treat which you've given the authors, the readers. It's a book that actually crowns 35 years of a very intense diplomatic career, which I do not want to go into the details of. But he has dealt with some of the key geographies which are relevant to India, geographies as well as subjects, whether it is economic diplomacy in the World Bank, or whether it is handling sensitive assignments. The last one, of course, was more than sensitive. It is what has already been talked about so much. And that is also the most important, primarily, which has been dominating the public domain. The eventful tenure, as is this last tenure as the last High Commissioner of Pakistan, representing India, before the relationship was actually downgraded to become a charge d'affaires. We all know the events which took us to that juncture. But more than that, his book is a veritable, I would say, a tour de force in 8 sections spanning 7.5 decades. I think Ambassador Bisaria gives a completely comprehensive overview, which is carefully arranged decade by decade, a very interesting arrangement. And it captures the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs of a relationship fraught by the very accident of his birth. He brings the narrative to a crescendo, which is a momentously personal account of the vexed tenure as High Commissioner in Islamabad in a year that starts with Pulwama, then comes Balakot, and comes then to an abrupt end following the revocation of Article 370 in August 2019. Really, indeed, a very momentous year. And in the final chapter, actually, which he, just before the penultimate epilogue to the book, which he calls History's Ambiguous Lessons, he describes these 7.5 decades very aptly as a board game of snakes and ladders between India and Pakistan. It's a very apt analogy when I talk of ebbs and flows, snakes and ladders. And typical of the snakes and ladders of this engagement, if August 29 saw relations sour to reach their nadir, you also had the November of that year, when the Kartarpur corridor is opened, and you have this pilgrims starting to go to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Guru Nanak from India into Pakistan. So these contrived corridors, cunning passages of the 7.5 decades of history which you witnessed. This is a story which has been very carefully crafted and built up in this book. And the prologue itself dives into the structure of the relationship, how the two-nation theory itself was an anachronism in 1947. It actually defied the dominant, prevalent Western notions of what a state should be. And dominant Western notion of a state that had actually been around for several centuries. And yet, contrary to all the Western benchmarks, according to which a nation state was not about religion or race, but it was more about sharing a history, ethnicity, a culture, and a territory. Territory was part of it, yes, but there were many other things which went with it. But the colonial enterprise somehow backtracked and created a nation which somehow ended up being created on the basis of religion, language, and there start the problems. So consequently, post-independence, you see the two nations, the two twins actually, birthed in a way in a very violent process of vivisection, forced vivisection, which were given birth to. They diverged in spite of having a certain shared cultural intimacy. India set out to define for itself a distinct, definitive, modern, post-colonial identity, an identity based defiantly not on any religion or language, but one that would encompass all. Pakistan sought to do the exact opposite. What was Pakistan? It was everything which was not India, where India is construed as the other. And this very notion of India as the other then becomes the kind of discourse where it is perceived, Pakistan perceives India as a kind of existential threat, a security threat. And that is how the relationship reaches where it is and goes into the cycle of ebb and flow, rise and fall constantly. And of course, Ambassador Bisaria brings into this his vast experience of the World Bank, Washington, D.C., and across embassies from Moscow, Poland, you name it, he's been there. So he brings that geopolitical perspective which has also clouded this relationship, the changing great game played in the neighborhood, what impact it has had. But finally, it is a narration that brings you up to date with perhaps the most riveting account, embellished through a ringside view of recent incidents that make it a book that, as I said, once begun, is extremely difficult to put down. And it asks the question, does diplomacy matter in this game of dice, this game of snakes and ladders? And to that intriguing question, asked by an ace practitioner of the art of diplomacy, the answer is given in the title of the book. Yes, it matters because diplomacy essentially in this situation is and has been about anger management. How not to let the relationship run away, spiral out of control. And that is carefully through these 7.5 decades. Who are the practitioners, who are the actors, the diplomats who have worked meticulously to make this possible? And that is a framework through which, whether it is the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, 1947, after the 47-49 war, whether you talk of 1965 or come to the Shimla Agreement, or right up to Kargil, the Mumbai terror attacks, and the most recent 2021 ceasefire where we've reached. Everywhere, what happens after the Balakot airstrikes, the book highlights the diplomatic outreaches that followed military action. And that is really the core of the book. So in this process, the book weaves, I think, one of the richest tapestries of intricate diplomatic history between India and Pakistan that I would not talk much about, but I think every reader will need to uncover the richness of it page by page as they go through this book. So that is what we are here for. We have an excellent panel discussion after this. Congratulations, Ajay, for this great work. And thank you all for being here, braving the chaos in the Habitat Center and reaching here almost on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. May I now invite Ain Lau Zukam, Managing Editor, ORF Books, for the remarks from the publishers.
Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to say a few words about Anger Management by Ajay Bisaria, a book all of us at ORF is deeply privileged to publish. The relationship between India and Pakistan has been stormy ever since the two nations came into being. It's also a staple on the news and is one of the sub-issues that pretty much everyone has a view about. There have been several books written on the subject, of which a few have been outstanding. So what sets anger management apart? For a start, it's different from other books on the subject because of the novel approach it adopts. It looks at the relationship between the two siblings from independence to the present day, largely through the perspective of the diplomats, Indian and also a few Pakistani, who served on the ground. Most books on the history of Indo-Pak relations focus on the big events of the time. In this book, the author goes deep into the backstories of the seminal events and personalities that have defined the relationship by talking to former heads of missions, analyzing their reports, and using recently declassified documents to present a gripping account of the ups and downs of the Indo-Pak roller coaster. As we know, Ajay Bisaria was the last Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, a distinction he still holds as there hasn't been a new High Commissioner appointed since he was expelled in 2019. At the time he was in office, the relationship was especially rocky. That was when the Pulwama terrorist attack took place, as well as the Indian airstrikes on Balakot and the high drama over the captured Indian Air Force pilot. Ambassador Bisaria provides new and compelling details on all the events that took place on his watch. Of special interest to the reader will be his analysis of the ISI and the enigmatic head of the state, General Bajwa, and the relationship between the ISI and the then head of state, Imran Khan, whose antics often defied the imagination. Also of interest will be his key witness accounts of key moments in the meetings between Prime Minister Vajpayee and General Musharraf. There are also insights into Prime Minister Modi's hopes for the future for the relationship, as well as those of military and diplomatic leadership. Anger Management is a book of impeccable scholarship, written in a lucid and engaging style. It has already been hailed by scholars and reviewers and has hit the bestseller list. And we very much hope that it will reach a wide audience in India and outside the subcontinent. Thank you.
So may I now invite Ambassador Bisaria, Ambassador Raghavan, Shri Deveshwar, Indrani and Sanjay for a formal launch photo. Thanks, Ambassador Bisaria, and thank you so much. And congratulations, a formal congratulations once again. Let me just first hand over the mic to you for your author's remarks and whatever is it that you want to say about the book before we take a stab at it and try to understand some of the nuances that you have brought out. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Harsh. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome everyone. Great to be here. Let me start by thanking Observer Research Foundation and Sanjoy and Harsh and all of you for helping put this together, this event at a time when in Delhi there seems to be 5 events a day and everyone rushing to so many of them. So thank you for putting it together. Thank you for giving me a very nurturing intellectual home at ORF, where we exchanged so many ideas over the last few months that I've been there. And thank you, Aleph, for being such a wonderful publisher, for putting the faith in me and in being such an excellent publishing house, producing such a wonderfully published book and such great editorial quality from David Davidar and from Ainla, who personally edited a large part of this book. So thank you very much, and thank you to each one of you here today. And I want to especially give a shout out to my tribe of the Indian Foreign Service, and a lot of members of which are here, and particularly Ambassador Parthasarthi, my predecessor, who's here and who's made it just after coming back from the United States. And it's been so wonderful to be part of this journey for 35 years. And a lot of what happened in this book is a product of many conversations, many experiences over the years. So what is this? Thank you. So what is this book about? You know, it's a long 560-page answer to a short question. What do Indian diplomats do in Pakistan? What is it that you guys do? What is it that you experience? And how do you handle this relationship, which is so much in the news, so troubled? And what exactly are we doing about it? So in a sense, my book is not a telling, but a retelling of this story. It's been told so many times, including by Raghavan on our panel, who's been an advisor, in a sense, for the book. He wrote another brilliant book himself 5 years ago, talking about this relationship and the people next door. And the whole idea of my book, what Raghavan did was a historian's account. What I wanted to put together was a practitioner's account. And basically, the issue was to, or the approach to this book was to try and tell the story of this 76 years of these ties, putting a strong lens on the Indian diplomats and trying to make the Indian diplomat in Pakistan the primary protagonist of this story, with all the events playing in the background. So it is an account of my 2 years there, but equally of my 24 predecessors and what they experienced when they were in Pakistan, especially when momentous events were taking place, including the conflicts and the wars, and how we reacted. What I have done in this book is talk about the 7.5 decades in 8 chapters, but also start with an essay reflecting on the major issues that have populated this relationship, whether it's territory or security or ideology, and centrally Pakistan's identity crisis, which has defined many of the actions they've taken, many of the flawed choices on the part of Pakistan. And in the end, I've tried to write an essay reflecting on what the future could be like till the 2047, when both countries are 100. Will we still be shooting for a century, as one of the scholars called it? Or would there be a modus vivendi we can come to? Can history offer some lessons? So I think the book is all about those conversations, and yet the attempt was to make it available to and accessible to a general reader rather than foreign policy wonks and international affairs specialists, and in talking about having conversations about a relationship that is very important to us, and not just important to us, but in the popular mind, along with cricket and movies, Pakistan is way up there. And therefore, I felt it would be interesting to talk about it. Just a word on the title. A lot of people have asked me why anger management. One of the metaphors and motifs in this relationship over 75 years has been anger. There's been anger about a lot of issues, including the 4 wars that India went to. There was a foundational anger about partition. There was a lot of anger about territory, the loss of territory, whether it was Bangladesh or what happened in Siachen. And equally, a lot of anger on India's part about terrorism. But there was also, in terms of policy, multiple conversations about the motif of management. The argument being that this is a problem that cannot be resolved, but it perhaps needs to be managed in a way that it doesn't get into an ugly conflagration. And these ideas seem to be, sort of recurring in this relationship, and we just playfully put them together to call it anger management. And of course, the marketing strategy was that if the geostrategy types don't buy it, the self-help groups might buy it. So that was also a thought behind it. So thank you very much for letting me talk about that basic idea.
Thank you. And whichever way you look at it, you are ensuring that it becomes a bestseller. So there's no getting away from that. But thank you so much, Ambassador Bisaria, for these remarks. And as you can see, we have a stellar panel here with us. I think from different vantage points, all three. Ambassador Raghavan, Mr. Deveshwar, and Indrani have all looked at this relationship from academic, journalistic, historian, diplomat's perspective. So we are going to have an interesting takeaway from this conversation in multiple dimensions, I guess. But before I go to them, Ambassador Bisaria, just one thing that I think might be useful to talk about before we venture into this India-Pakistan conversation is this role of diplomacy and diplomats. I mean, essentially that's what the book is. And you are taking a stab at a particular relationship, one of the most interesting and difficult ones for India. But we have often seen, the limits of diplomacy in that often arise, and we have also seen how diplomacy can achieve at times exceeding our expectations. So as a diplomat and as someone who looked at this journey of Indian diplomacy through the last more than 7 decades, where do you see the constraints emerging on a diplomat, particularly when you are handling a difficult relationship like Pakistan?
Yes, I think this is really one of the themes of the book, exploring the possible role that diplomacy and diplomats play. And towards the end, I've even tried to draw the lessons, and I've called it history's ambiguous lessons, because they are not very clear messages from the history of the relationship. But what we discover is that leadership matters a lot. The structural factors matter a lot. And when those structural factors and leadership issues and concerns of ideology and security and territory become more important, the role of diplomats and diplomacy is diminished. But on the margins, diplomacy matters. And there have been multiple illustrations of this in this relationship. We saw in the 60s that when Nehru was very cynical about dealing with Ayub Khan, the ambassador then, Rajeshwar Dayal, he was instrumental in getting Nehru on the table, or at least encouraging him to deal with this relationship. And similarly, Natwar Singh, when he was High Commissioner, he did manage to make Zia more palatable in India. Equally, a Pakistani High Commissioner, Jahangir Ashraf Qazi, did a lot of intense diplomacy with then Deputy PM Advani to make Musharraf palatable to India, and got him an invitation, in a sense, to Agra. So diplomats do play a role on the margins, and but it's easy to overemphasize that role. They are part of a system. And a national, a kind of national policy posture, where they would be informing that posture, but not necessarily guiding it completely.
Yes, because because of the point that you also raise in the book is about in this particular case, often the structural factors overwhelm and the ability of a diplomat to shape the outcome. So you are constrained in that fundamental sense, and therefore the limits are quite obvious. But let me now go to our panelists, and before I open, I ask some of the more conceptual questions in the book. Can I just ask all three of you, what is that one big takeaway from the book for you when you read the book and you think of India-Pakistan relationship? What is the one big thing that comes out, so that we can start from that big vantage point, and then we come to more nuanced interaction on some of the key issues? Ambassador Raghavan, with you.
Well, thank you first of all for inviting me, and Ajay, congratulations on the book. Well, my big takeaway is the point which Ajay made now and which he has made a number of times in this book, that contrary to the general impression in India, diplomats in Islamabad, Indian diplomats in Islamabad, have a fair amount of space to work in. The question is, how much space are they conceded by the government of India? And the same applies to Pakistani diplomats in New Delhi, that there is space to work in. And what Ajay mentioned about Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi or other Indian High Commissioners in Pakistan, Ambassador Parsarthi is here. So the general impression in India is that Indian diplomats in Islamabad, they are boxed in. The ISI has them, over a barrel. They can't do anything. I think that impression is wrong. I think Ajay's book does make a great effort in trying to correct that impression.
Thank you for having me here. I have 3 quick takeaways. First, I didn't think I'd ever say this, but I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Pakistan. If Pakistan had not expelled Ajay and he had finished his tenure in the normal course, he would not have been motivated to write this masterpiece of a book. So I think a debt of gratitude is certainly owed to Pakistan. Second, this is a marvelous book at so many different levels. But I think for Ajay's peers and future generations of foreign service officers, they're going to have a grouse. He has recovered everything in Indo-Pak relations from 47 till the current. There's nothing left for anyone else to write, because whatever they write is going to be repetitive. So congratulations for that great effort, Ajay. And third, it's an amazing book because it is at least 3 levels. There is a direct level of Indo-Pak diplomatic exchanges, but he also delves into what was happening inside Pakistan that explains those. Likewise, he also delves into a little bit into what is happening in India. And he also gives you the geopolitical situation where it impacted Indo-Pak relations. So for the reader, it's a 360-degree view of the events on India-Pakistan diplomatic exchanges right from 47 till now. So once again, it's an amazing book.
Thank you, ORF. But thank you, Ajay, because I don't think we could have had a better title for this book. In fact, it's such a wonder that nobody thought about this earlier, because it's just so apt. My biggest takeaway was something, a line that Ajay has written in the book, and I find that it's so emblematic of the relationship, which is that it's that the future of this relationship lies in the past, but that the past should not be a predictor for the future. And we kind of go through that circles, and whether it's a diplomat, whether it's journalists, just as a small piece of memory, one of my earliest memories of covering the India-Pak relationship coming from Calcutta, where Pakistan really didn't figure in that sense, and to find a city that was completely obsessed with Pakistan. It was 98, and it was just, the composite dialogue had just started, and we began with Sir Creek and then Siachen, and it was just unending. But we would have this terrible situation of dashing from Shastri Bhavan to the Pakistan High Commission and back, because there were competing, for all the diplomats in the room, this is something diplomats did, which is the MEA would do a briefing at 4 o'clock. There were no mobile phones, so we got carrier pigeons that said that the Pakistan High Commission was doing a briefing at 4:45. At 4:35, there was a general exodus from the MEA briefing while we ran to the Pakistan High Commission. And MEA cottoned on, so the next time we were called back to MEA. We were like, so apart from all the stuff that diplomats did in both Islamabad and Delhi, let me tell you from the point of view of an outsider or somebody who was just reporting the events, this is also something that diplomats did. But just for the book, it's a masterpiece, Ajay. It's a fabulous exercise. And I agree with Tilak, everything after this will be a repetition.
Mr. Raghavan, if I may, one of the observations that is often made these days is that what has happened in the last decade or last few years is that Pakistan has become marginal in Indian foreign policy thinking. And some have said that it's a good thing that we have been able to look beyond Pakistan, the larger challenges, because often you get trapped into the Pakistan syndrome. There's so much of Pakistan happening. Everyone is talking about Pakistan. Everyone is writing about Pakistan. Everyone thinks that he or she has an opinion in Pakistan. So when you look at this relationship today, do you think that's an apt assessment that we have successfully made Pakistan marginal and that it is yielding dividends, or is it something that is just waiting to come back to the normal, which was our past?
Well, I think it's good that we are no longer so strongly obsessive or focused on Pakistan in the way we were, let's say, 20 years ago or 25 years ago. It's also true that the asymmetries have grown. More than anything else, the Indian economy has performed quite well, reasonably well, while the Pakistan economy has regressed. And thirdly, it is also the case that in geopolitical terms, Pakistan has become somewhat marginal to many other conversations taking place in our region and also at a global level. So this is true. But I think there's an element of hubris in India, thinking that somehow we have graduated beyond Pakistan, or that we have graduated beyond our neighborhood. The fact is that this is your neighbor with whom you have deeply adversarial relations, is 250 million people. It is domestically unstable. It has nuclear weapons. There is no way you can not pay, that you should not be focused on Pakistan all the time. To think that somehow we have moved to a stage where Pakistan is no longer in our orbit is delusional. So I would say that we have to be much more focused on Pakistan and on our neighbors. And also, I think we should avoid the temptation. It's a kind of wishful thinking that somehow we have made Pakistan marginal, or that we have isolated Pakistan. No. What has happened is that there have been geopolitical changes, most predominantly the role which the United States has played. And also Pakistan has made very, very bad policy choices. And it has, in that sense, marginalized itself. But it is not as if some act on your part has produced this result. I think that would be deluding ourselves and indulging in wishful thinking.
So Tilak, one of the most interesting arguments in the book is about India's ability to control the escalation ladder post Balakot, there's this idea that the stability instability paradox that used to be the albatross around India's neck has somehow been overcome. That the challenge has been overcome. I think Ambassador Bisaria sees it as a paradigm shift in some ways, that the rethink that India undertook post that crisis. Is that your assessment as well? And do you think that will hold? And how do we think of the escalation ladder now, given that we have crossed a certain threshold in that relationship, the nuclear relationship in particular, because post 1998 that has been the big fundamental conceptual and policy question for everyone. I mean, academics have debated it, policymakers have tried to figure it out. So I think and in this book there are some very strong suggestions about it. Do you concur with that assessment?
You see, if you go back to the Mumbai attacks, and Ajay makes his point in the book, that had there been a strong retaliation at that time, maybe Uri and Balakot, Uri and Pulwama would not have happened. And there is proof to that, which is that after Balakot strikes, there was a change in the thinking of Army Chief General Bajwa. And he said that the days of terrorism are probably over. And then he goes on to talk about geoeconomics and stuff like that. So I think, yes, the kind of action that India did take in 2016 and 2019, and Pakistan's biggest sort of dangling to us, or the fear that they had created, that we have nuclear weapons and you can escalate very quickly. I think the government said, okay, we'll call you a bluff. And that's what they did. And suddenly you found that there was no escalation. You know, Pakistan retaliated, they had to retaliate, but didn't go up to any further thing. So basically, Pakistan is like a bully. So if you call their bluff and give them a bloody nose yourself, they were the ones who were going to back down, but they will also make a point because being the Islamic world's only the nuclear power, they cannot not retaliate, especially when it comes to India. You know, they have to show that it's parity and, you know, they're equals and things like that. So I think, yes, the retaliation under a nuclear overhang conventionally is something that has been controlled, and I think India managed it very well. And so didn't allow the situation to get out of hand. It was a very measured response that was given to Pulwama. And had that response been given a decade earlier, maybe things would have been very different. But now that has been established. And I think Pakistan realizes that nuclear weapons or no nuclear weapons, India is going to respond ferociously for any future, this kind of an incident that takes place. So I think they're still fumbling for a response. They've gone back to the drawing board that in case this happens in the future and India responds again, which they will, what is it that we can do? And therefore, I think this push towards geoeconomics and talking trade, or wanting to talk trade and somehow pull back, that's what is happening.
Indrani, we are of course talking about Pakistan on the eve of elections there, so it's also a very interesting time. I think one of the questions that is, of which there is an undercurrent in the book is who is India's interlocutor in Pakistan, and this question about a fundamental structural change within Pakistan where the military takes a back seat, that of course has not happened. So when you look at the situation today, are we looking at more of the same, given the domestic politics and foreign policy, how they intersect in Pakistan? Or do you visualize a change there? Because we have seen a lot of shift from Imran Khan now to Nawaz Sharif back, a Game of Thrones episode being played out. But in that context, when you are looking for interlocutors, there have been arguments that, look, if the military is the most powerful instrument, then let's deal with the military and get on with it. Do you see that possibility now emerging, or are we back again from India's vantage point, trying to figure out who really is the interlocutor there?
Well, I think the Indian position over the years has been that we deal with whoever is in power. As in, we dealt with Musharraf when he was a martial law administrator. We also dealt with him when he became president. We dealt with Nawaz. We dealt with Bhutto, etc. Looking at the elections, it's 4 years ago, the story was a flip of what we are seeing today. Imran was then the poster boy. Today, Nawaz is back. The supporters are the same. The cast of characters are just moved around. So, but do you then say that Imran does, or Nawaz Sharif, when he does become Prime Minister, which he will in the next few days, do we not deal with Nawaz Sharif and we go deal with Asim Munir? I don't think so. And in my view, I think, the US used to do that, has done that. I think to their detriment, to Pakistan's detriment as well. So I think we've kept a fairly good calibrated approach of dealing with the person who signs the check and who obviously signs the check, not the backroom guy. So yes, I mean, obviously the military is in power, but if until General Munir assumes the position of the President of Pakistan and is officially the head of Pakistan, I think we will continue to deal with whoever is officially in power. And I think that's not a bad thing.
So Harsh, if I may, all three very interesting responses. So let me just reinforce some of the messages and talk about what I have said in the book in all these cases. Now, first on what Raghavan says, I want to really reinforce that, because in India, often the conversation is around what could be described as strategic neglect of Pakistan and leading to a position of strategic complacence. And I think we ought to be warning against it, because this is precisely what happened, I think, analogously in the West Asia. In Israel, 7th of October was strategic neglect of the Gaza problem, of complacence about the lack of threat from there. So I think we should not be diminishing the potential of a threat in the future, and ought to be watching it carefully. And from there stems the argument about the policy posture that India should have. And I have argued in the book that it should be a combination of active defense, which is what Tilak mentioned, that an assured retaliation for acts of terrorism, Pulwama being assured a Balakot response or a Balakot plus response. But along with a posture of flexible and creative engagement. And that would mean not neglecting the Pakistan issue, and what, as Indrani said, it's not, perhaps now is not a good time to talk to Pakistan because there's no policy coherence. But when this hybrid regime emerges of Nawaz Sharif backed by the army, what we ought to recognize is the structural reality of the predominance of the army in Pakistan. And any conversation, I would say, with any civilian leader has to be triangulated with what the army is saying or doing. And I think twice in the past, we saw the consequences of not doing that. So Vajpayee's bus yatra of 1999, it was perhaps one of the greatest and most forward-looking and boldest initiatives from India for peace with Pakistan. But we failed before that to have a conversation with the army to check if it was on board. And sure enough, it wasn't, and Musharraf was not on board, and we got Kargil. And similarly, I think when PM Modi visited, we saw that the army in Pakistan was not on board, and we got Pathankot very soon after, and problems in Kashmir thereafter. So I think the posture has to be creative engagement, covert or overt, with the main power structure in Pakistan, which is the army, which will continue to be the army, and interacting with the civilians also, but keeping that factor always in mind.
Ajay, if I can push you on that, because there is a tension there, and the tension is that we want a structural change in Pakistan, which is that civilians should be strengthened. And at the same time, we know that the army is the most important instrument of power there, and therefore we have to deal with them to deliver outcomes. How do we square the circle that, while of course we keep on engaging the army, but at the same time ensuring that the democratic component of the civilian structures also gets strengthened? I mean, this is a difficult task. I mean, Americans have not succeeded. I mean, in fact, they have been the ones who have often created more problems because of their postures. But from India's perspective, because this is a point that you make about structure, ultimately that's a structural change we want, a strengthened democratic institutional framework of Pakistan getting strengthened. So how do we square this circle?
Yeah, I think we ought to acknowledge that policy dilemma. That will always be present, that do we engage with the civilians or the army or both? And I think the answer lies in being creative and realist and pragmatic about it. Because since the army is the central power structure determining the shape of the India relationship, we ought to be engaging, I think, with the army on a continuous basis. Most countries do that, the US and China. And in fact, we have been doing that in a big way, because how do you think the 2021 ceasefire came, which has sustained for 4 years? There were quiet channels of engagement with the army, and therefore I would advocate a policy stance of our security establishment being in continuous touch with Pakistan's security establishment. The difference would be that in our case, in India's case, the security establishment is under the supervision of the political leadership, but in Pakistan, it is the political leadership. And, recognizing this reality, I think, should be the kind of creative engagement we indulge in.
I'll just take one more round of questions and then I'll open this up for audience questions and comments as well. Ambassador Raghavan, one aspect that the book also talks about, and I think that is very, very critical in our case, is the great power engagement in the region and how that has impacted this relationship. Today, you talked about in your reply earlier how geopolitics has changed, how we are looking at a renewed focus in terms of the fragmentation of the world, China's rise and everything that comes with it, and India's profile rising commensurate with those changes. So when you look at today's geopolitical configuration, of course it has benefited India, but in terms of India-Pakistan relationship, what are the factors that we should be thinking about when we look at our relationship with Pakistan today, both in terms of China, US, and other?
If we look around the world today, I think the two salutary lessons are what is happening in Europe, in Ukraine, and what is happening, as Ajay said, in Gaza, in Palestine. And when we look at our neighborhood, the lesson for us is that this is a trajectory we do not want to follow. I mean, you don't want to be in the kind of situation which Europe and Ukraine are in today, or where Israel and Palestine are in today. And whatever you can do to prevent that kind of eventuality with Pakistan, you should try to do that. Because that is really the central challenge for your diplomacy. How you keep your neighborhood stable. Because all your national developmental plans and your economic aspirations are tied to that central feature. So I don't think we should necessarily look at the world as being entirely in our favor. I think there are certain forces which are operating to help us and which we can make use of, but there are also lessons and takeaways which we should be mindful of. And I think what that also means is that dealing with Pakistan as it is and not how as we would like it to be. I think there is not going to be a civil-military balance in Pakistan in the foreseeable future. That is very, very clear. So if you think that we are going to we will be in a situation where we can talk to the civilians and talk to the military and navigate our way through, we are not going to be given an easy option like that. It's going to be very, very difficult. But the point is that you have to take that challenge. You can't say, I won't deal with Pakistan because of this civil-military imbalance and their internal structural fractures, and because of that it's too difficult for me and it's too risky for me. Because not taking those risks means that you're leaving yourself open, you're leaving your flanks open to a Ukraine-type situation or a Palestine-type situation.
Tilak, the other neighborhood, you have written about it, the Afghan question and how that impacts the relationship. We are seeing some interesting developments on that front. Where do you think this relation, Pakistan is in a very interesting phase where almost all three of its neighbors are sparring with Pakistan, it's a very delicate situation for Pakistan. But from that perspective, when you look at the neighborhood, not only India, you have the same questions being raised by the Taliban government in Afghanistan and also by Iran now. How do you see this regional configuration mapping out, and where do you see the Afghan question leading not only Pakistan but also India-Pakistan relationship?
I think Pakistan is really in a very tight situation on the security front, especially with the Afghans and specifically with the Pashtuns. When the Taliban took over Kabul in August 21, it was jubilation and rejoicing in Pakistan. The 20 years covert program of supporting the Taliban to come back into Kabul had, reached success. And Imran Khan even called it breaking the shackles of slavery. But very soon they realized that the three most important things they wanted Taliban to deliver on have not happened. They said, India will be out of Kabul. It was for a while. And now the Taliban have invited India back into Kabul. They thought that the Taliban would recognize the Durand Line for the 20 years support that Pakistan had provided. And the Taliban have told them categorically that we do not recognize the Durand line. In fact, they've said there is no border. They've uprooted the fence in many parts of, along the line. And third and most important, Pakistan had thought that they will restrain, if not defang, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which had camps in Afghanistan. And they said, sorry, we're not going to do that. At best, we will facilitate your conversation with them. And you sort it out along with the ulamas. So all three major things have failed. And now, in order to force the Taliban to do something about the TTP, because the TTP attacks are really hurting Pakistan. There were some statistics published by Pakistani-based think tanks. They've had, apart from the civilian casualties, they've had an average of 44 security forces, that is the army, the police and paramilitary, month after month in the entire 2023. Can you imagine 44 personnel of the security forces being killed by either the TTP or by the Baloch groups per month? And in fact, in January, there were 90 attacks in which 93 people died. So TTP is hurting them. So to make a pushback, they've pushed out 1.7 million undocumented Afghans. That has its own dynamic and will lead to complications further down the road. So in a nutshell, Pakistan faces a very tricky situation. The TTP has challenged Pakistan's sovereignty by the Taliban have challenged Pakistan's sovereignty by not accepting the Durand line. And the TTP on the Pakistani side is also pushing for handing over this area, the erstwhile FATA, to them. So there is in fact a potential Pashtun pincer on both sides of the Durand line. If Pakistan does not handle it imaginatively, they're going to be in for a larger Pashtun entity. Idea could take shape. The Baloch are active too. And in the case of Iran, those recent strikes. And the fourth neighbor, China, is not very happy with Pakistan either. Because whatever they had felt that the economic relationship and CPEC would be a big game changer, it's plateaued out. China had committed to about $62 billion. The total investment is not more than 2022. And they're very unhappy with Pakistan. So it's a very difficult situation for Pakistan. And this should have been the first priority of the army and for Asim Mini. Instead, you find that he's taken the easier way out, not easier, but he's looking at Pakistan's economy. He's this SIFC and things like that. Rather than taking on the challenge headlong of security, he thinks he's comfortable dealing with Pakistan's economy. I mean, I don't know what kind of an army or what kind of a general he is.
Indrani, just Tilak pointed out the China factor. So, this has been, again, one of those perennial questions Indian policymakers have asked everyone in India who thinks about strategy. The two-front war situation, how do we think about, conceptually about China's role? Tilak has pointed out the tensions there. But given what we have seen in China-Pakistan relations in the recent past, how far do you think this relationship will go? And what it means for India at a time when India's relations with China are also in doldrums, with a very delicate stage?
Well, China may be unhappy with Pakistan and how Pakistan has managed CPEC, but China is not going to touch its investment in Pakistan. It's not pulling away from Pakistan. It's because it's a much deeper investment than just Pakistan. There is India, there is the sea, there is a whole strategic construct around China's investment in Pakistan. Pakistanis used to say until recently that the very fact that its geographical situation was its ace, was its trump card. The US withdrawal from Afghanistan killed that trump card. Pakistan it is struggling fundamentally, it is struggling with geopolitical irrelevance because the powers that need it are not the powers that Pakistan wants. Once the US left, Afghanistan did not need Pakistan in the way that it did for the 30 years prior. That loss of attention has been debilitating for Pakistan. The fact that Afghanistan would treat Pakistan in just the way that it is treating, whether it's run by the Taliban or whether it was run by the Ashraf Ghani government, was something that I think both Mr. Devashar and TCA have pointed that out earlier in their previous writings, that it was going to happen. Certainly, Tilak has written about this many times. But at a point when Pakistan should then be doubling down on its best friend, which is China, it isn't. It isn't because at one level, there is a dichotomy inside Pakistan about is China my best bet going forward, given the geopolitical tensions between the US and China? Is it not? And that is a debate that is definitely going on inside Pakistan. Should we then continue this? But they have no choice because America doesn't need them right now. When it does at a certain later stage, then yes. So I think there is a geopolitical problem that Pakistan is battling inside Pakistan. That debate has not been resolved. And until that, of course, that debate cannot be resolved by Pakistan alone, but that is a debate that Pakistan will have to deal with as it goes forward, because it is that is its fundamental, its core problem, its geopolitical irrelevance.
So before I open this up, Ajay, one final question from my side. Elections in Pakistan, elections in India, do we see a potential for a thaw as we move forward? After all the hopelessness of the last few years, is there hope emerging somewhere on the horizon?
Well, I think fortunately, both in India and Pakistan, you have very predictable elections for different reasons. We know exactly or mostly what the outcome will be. And so I would look at the next 6 months with some degree of cautious optimism. Because I think both Modi being here and Nawaz Sharif being there in what are perhaps legacy terms, there would be a political seduction in leaving a legacy of peace. Add to that the fact that we've had a sustained ceasefire, we've gone 5 years without major terrorism, significant drops in infiltration and terrorist violence in Jammu and Kashmir. So also in this relationship, we've seen that fresh mandates, new governments are always time for pause and looking at this problem with fresh eyes. And I think that would happen certainly in the second half of the year. So I would be cautiously optimistic, but it's a hugely accident-prone relationship. So, I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it. But I think 2024 could be a good year for small steps forward in this relationship.
So on that cautiously optimistic note, let me open this up for you, for your questions, comments, observations. Yes, Manoj, I'll come. I'll start with you.
Thanks. This is a question to Ajay. Just wondering what kind of a role has the United States, we know it played a negative role in 71 in the India-China equation. What kind of a role in recent decades has the United States played in the relationship between India and Pakistan? Meaning, has it been a nurturing one? Has it been a cautioning one? How would you describe the American role in the India-China relationship?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. This was Dr. Joshi from ORF, but I would invite others to please introduce themselves as well. Just behind you.
My name is Ashok Mehta, General Mehta, and my question is on back-channel diplomacy, which you have covered in your book. From our experience of what diplomats do and can't do, we've seen that back channel has been able to produce a more favorable result in creating conditions where a political solution is possible. And you have in your book talked about Musharraf's 4-point formula. Such a great deal was achieved by that. So that's the first part. That do you think that that is the route, and if diplomats can't manage the anger, can back channel do it? And my second question is related to what TCA has been saying, and that is with regard to, I think it's very strange that we refuse to talk to, we have refused to talk to Pakistan even after having created a deterrence, a Balakot deterrence. I say this because we have stuck to this record, the needle stuck in the groove of no talks till terror is eliminated. Now, terror has not been eliminated. Terror will never be eliminated. So this policy that this government is following brings us nowhere. And the fact that we are not talking to Pakistan, a host of our neighbors, I've just been traveling, if you go to Nepal, if you go to Bangladesh, if you go to Sri Lanka, they all want SARC to be revived. But nobody wants to take the position against. So your response to these two?
Ambassador Bhatia at the back.
Rajiv Bhatia, former ambassador. Very briefly, there are two rooms, the corner offices in the Ministry of External Affairs in South Block, occupied by two people, Foreign Secretary and Foreign Minister, who handle these two very difficult neighbors, Pakistan on one side and Myanmar on the other side. I invite you to reflect on how to look at Myanmar from the Pakistan lens, and at Myanmar also from the river side as well. Is it possible to put it very directly, a situation in Pakistan where the all-powerful army one day gets down to the situation where the all-powerful army or military in Myanmar is today 3 years after the coup? Thank you.
So let us take these three, right? US, and then Myanmar, and of course, back channel.
So, I think, Manoj, on the US role, I think somewhere around 99, the hyphen went away in the US strategic mind between India and Pakistan. And I think Clinton's role in resolving the Kargil crisis on the 4th of July 1999 was quite stellar, because it was, for one, it wasn't a role of a mediator. It was a role of coercive diplomacy deployed by Clinton and the United States to get Pakistan to back off in Kargil. And I think that built India's confidence. Since then, I would argue it's been patchy. You even had a sort of semi-offer by Trump of mediation. But on the other hand, a lot of the diplomacy India was doing was amplified by the United States and US diplomats in multiple ways. So I think the US has had a positive role. Through the Afghan crisis, the 20 years that the United States was there, our concern, or India's concern, was that the US was using or obsessing as a priority over its own exit from Afghanistan, and therefore not being very sensitive to the concerns on the Eastern Front and Pakistan's deploying of militant organizations there. And I think our continuous conversations with the United States were that the principle of Pakistan deploying militant organizations for foreign policy goals should be countered both for the West and the East. So I would say overall a positive US play in the India-Pakistan relationship. On General Mehta's question about the back channel, certainly, I mean, I would be a big advocate for the back channel. or quiet channels, or whatever name you would give them. There ought to be these conversations on quiet channels between India and Pakistan, because not everything should be done very publicly or in the public domain. We've achieved a good deal in the past, and even when we emerge on the other side of a quiet channel conversation with an outcome which becomes public, I think we ought to continue to have ways of having quiet channels with the Pakistan establishment that takes it forward. You had another question on. Yeah, so revival of SARC, again, I think there is, as I said, cautious optimism about the future. There should be a point. No, now I remember your basic question was why India's posture of no talks with terror. Is that a valid posture? So I would say that, if you look at 2019, India's posture is reasonably ambiguous. No talks with terrorism. It hasn't been clearly defined what is the level of terror that would be acceptable for India to be on the table. And let's not forget that in August 2019, it was Pakistan that stopped the conversations. Pakistan decided to downgrade the high commissions. Pakistan, in fact, superimposed on India's policy a posture of no talks until Article 370 is reversed. And that is what painted Imran Khan's government in a corner and painted subsequent other governments. But the problem was all through this period of Pakistan's polycrisis and chaos that India didn't have a clear, coherent interlocutor on the other side. But as I said, I think the ducks are lining up. This year might be a year for conversation. I agree with you. SARC has been a very useful instrument. In fact, SARC and SCO are multilateral umbrellas on which we could start conversations that are also bilateral. So I think we should keep those. Sir, your question about Myanmar. I think there is, India's engagement, I think, should be calibrated, creative. My argument is we should be engaging the army all the time, because whether it's in the front office or the back office, it's running the show. And that would be the reality. So in a sense, dealing with the generals of Myanmar and the generals of Pakistan are not very different. But when they have a civilian front, as they would have perhaps Nawaz Sharif, they would be shy of having these conversations overtly. But I think the conversations should take place. And 3 years later, if they come to the front office, certainly we should be engaging with them.
Can I now take the mic to the back of the room, because I think there are a lot of youngsters there. So let's give them this opportunity, and then we'll come back for the third round.
So my question is regarding India's two-front conundrum. So given the fact that Pakistan is facing multiple crises at its western border with both Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa at a boil, so can we not create the same anxieties in Pakistan, which in Pakistan which it creates in us? And how can India leverage this predicament of Pakistan? What should be this policy of India?
Good evening, respected panelists. I am Premansh Sinha, a second-year student of political science at Ramjas College, University of Delhi. A few years ago, the former Foreign Secretary and National Security Advisor of India, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, said that there are 5 types of Pakistan: the civilian community, the civil society, the diplomat, the politicians. Then there were the jihadi elements, and the 5th was the military. And he said that we cannot deal with Pakistan. We cannot deal entirely with that particular country while only dealing with the military and the diplomatic, through the diplomatic and the military channels. What is your view on this particular statement? Thank you.
Namaste, sir. My name is Akshay. I am from JNU. My question is, in the month of April and May, we are having general election of Lok Sabha. So how Pakistan is looking towards the general election of India, especially towards the domestic politics of India? Thank you.
Well, I think there are two questions. One was about two front, and secondly, should we not play on Pakistan's anxieties? The fact is your 5 times the size of Pakistan. Your economy is much, much larger. You don't need to play on their anxieties. You are a major anxiety for Pakistan. But on two front, I think there are two aspects. One is the preparedness aspect and the military aspect, which is very important. And it's the job of militaries to be prepared for worst case scenarios. But it's also the job of other people not to, go down the route of what I call self-fulfilling prophecies. We shouldn't think that we are confronted with a two-front situation when we actually may not be. Let's not imagine the worst even before we are facing it. Let's not forget that the India-Pakistan ceasefire, which Ajay had spoken about and others have also mentioned, took place at a time of a radical decline in the situation on the line of actual control with China. So the fact that your borders or the LOC with Pakistan is stabilized while you are having such a difficult situation with China should always act as a caution against us rushing to the conclusion of, we are going to be faced with a two-front situation.
Yes, and on the question of, you quoted Ambassador Menon's dealing with Pakistan with multiple policies. And I think that's wise counsel, because we are talking of a Pakistan with multiple stakeholders, and engaging all of them would be good policy, except in times of breakdowns of the relationship, where all aspects of the relationship tend to break down. So we've already been discussing how India should be having a separate way of dealing and engaging with the Pakistan army, in dealing with the civilian government, and certainly in dealing with civil society and multiple elements. And, even overall in diplomacy, there's a valid argument that there is a diplomatic deficit if only a bunch of elites are dealing with diplomacy. There ought to be more widespread engagement between the two societies and so on. So I think that is a valid point. On Akshay's question about general elections, Pakistan understands India very well. They watch India very closely, so they know which way India is going. And there was a strand of thought at some point when I was in Pakistan about saying that, while Modi is there, this relationship cannot improve. But I would point out to them that would you sort of wait till that moment of a change in regime? But I think that thought is in a minority. It's not a mainstream strategic thought. And Pakistan understands the way India is. It knows which way India is going, and it will want to engage with India. In my view, no matter which government comes in place, they recognize that there would be another BJP government in place, and they would need to deal with it.
So we'll take one final round of questions. I think there are 2 hands here, and then one will go at the back. So.
Thank you very much, A.K. Jain. My question is basically a suspicion, which I heard from Pakistanis also, that Imran Khan was destroyed and removed from the position the way he visited Moscow, met Putin, and this was not tolerated by America. What is your view?
I think there was a much more complex reasons, or much more basic reasons. The reason Imran Khan has been leveled to the ground is that the relationship between him and the army broke down. So it was a messy divorce in a sense. And basically, it was a project launched by the army which failed. And the army had to, it was the end was begun by General Bajwa, and General Asim Munir was given the job of finishing it. And that is what we are seeing play out. And there are lots of cricket analogies there, that the bat has been snatched away and he's been clean bowled thrice in a row in 3 different cases, and also he's in prison. But in a sense, he is, and I've written about it, an X that doesn't go away. He is going to be there as a factor, even in prison.
So the lady there, because we have not had, yes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tanya. I had a quick question, a little different from the line of questioning we've had so far. Do you think that movies and over-dramatized cinematic productions nowadays, reflecting on India-Pakistan relations, latching on this good versus bad narrative, are doing good or bad? And let me sort of just put it in the sense that, do you think soft power, especially social media, movies, and productions, are they impacting geopolitics in any sense? Do you think it's worsening relations, strengthening, no impact whatsoever?
Sir, my name is Prashant. I am from JNU. Sir, my question is to Deveshwar, sir. Sir, there are new emerging actors emerging in Pakistan, such as Pashtun Tahfuz movement of Manjur Pashtun. So should India can go beyond interacting with the main actors and should interact with these new emerging forces which can shape the future of Pakistan?
You're right, there are emerging forces among the Pashtuns, there are emerging forces among the Baloch. You know, recently the protest demonstration they had, and this new firebrand grassroots leader, Dr. Marang Baloch, who has come onto the scene. Any contact by India to any of these will be the kiss of death. We should at no stage be seen. What happens behind the scene is different, but should not be even seen close to them or in contact with them. And it's unfortunately that some of Indrani's tribe tries to get in touch with them to get a bite or something. You know, that bite is going to last you for 12 hours or max 1 day. But the damage it will do to the civil society movements that are just about coming into their own would be not worth the effort. So we should stay away from, yes, but you can amplify what they are doing by following them on Twitter or X now, tweeting about them and following a lot of them to get an idea what is actually happening. You can help like that. You know, for example, what the Indian civil society did in the case of Maldives. You know, you change the narrative and suddenly Maldives realize that if there are 300,000 tweets coming out on a daily basis, the impact it has. Similarly, I think a lot of the Indian social media activists should look at the Pashtuns and the Baloch closely.
You know, and about the films and the box office is. Please remember the box office comprises of Indians and Indian diaspora across the world. They are the ones who populate this box office, and there is a prevailing atmosphere. Second, to dash all such hopes. In the Times of India, for several years we ran a program called Aman Ki Asha. We realized that after the chefs came and after the film stars crossed borders once and twice, and everybody had exchanged their stories of how wonderful the average person in each country, in the other country was, we ran to a stop, because then the difficult conversations started and we couldn't go any further. So they had a little impact apart from a sort of momentary gratification. That momentary gratification happens if you get to travel to Pakistan, because Pakistanis are very hospitable, and similarly in India. But that has almost no impact on either the politics or the policies between the two countries.
Ajay, last word to you.
Read the book. That would be one plug.
Buy the book.
That would be one plug. But, you know, I think just continuing what Indrani said, the media and particularly social media is a very new phenomenon. It's a two-edged sword at the moment. It reflects very new opinions, but it's often a toxic multiplier of old opinions and planted disinformation and so on. But what gives me some hope in the relationship is the number of youth in Pakistan and in India who seem to share aspirations. And if you see some of the newer podcasts coming out, there is an unhidden admiration for what India has done, an unhidden criticism of what is happening within Pakistan, and a desire to be a normal country. And I think that impulse is a very positive one, which should be encouraged in different ways.
Thank you, Ajay, and thank you to all the panelists for this wonderful interaction. I encourage all the youngsters at the back who are studying this relationship as students, look at this book carefully. It is not only an interesting memoir, but it is also a very interesting work in historiography, because it is a multi-method book, as we say in our academic jargon. It's part memoir, part history, and I think that the richness that it brings to India-Pakistan relationship, and the study of it, the freshness that it brings to the table is very, very interesting, and you will learn a lot. So certainly, as Ajay said, read the book. Don't just come enjoy his sessions in the media, which you tend to do more often than read the book. But please do read the book, buy the book, and enjoy the book, and learn from it how to write a good book. So hopefully we'll have many more books coming out, despite Tilak saying that there is everything that has to be said has been said in this book. So thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Ambassador Raghavan, Tilak, Indrani. And thank you all for bearing the winters and being with us this evening. And please join us for dinner.